Hello and welcome to our morning edition of Arirang News. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour. The White House confirms a South Korea-U.S. summit during APEC. It also shares the details of Trump's upcoming Asia trip. The Presidential Chief of Staff for Policy and the Industry Minister are back in Seoul after tariff negotiations with their U.S. counterparts. What was said? And can this be done before the upcoming bilateral summit at APEC? The court cases for the former president and First Lady continue, with both of their cases being heard at court. Yoon, however, is not expected to appear in person. Good morning and welcome to New Day at Arirang. With the APEC coming up in a week, the White House confirmed the dates U.S. President Donald Trump will be in South Korea, as well as a ROK-U.S. summit. They also announced that the U.S. leader will hold talks with Chinese President Xi Jinping in South Korea next week. Our Lee Seung-jae starts us off.
The White House announced Thursday that U.S. President Donald Trump will hold bilateral meetings with South Korean President Lee Jae-myung in South Korea next week as part of his upcoming trip to Asia. According to White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt, President Trump is scheduled to meet President Lee on Wednesday.
On Wednesday morning local time, the president will fly to Busan, where he will participate in a bilateral meeting with the President of the Republic of Korea, deliver keynote remarks at the APEC CEO luncheon, and then participate in a U.S. APEC leaders working dinner.
While the White House statement suggests the Lee-Trump summit would take place in Busan, South Korean government officials later clarified that the meeting is set for Gyeongju, the official venue of the APEC Leaders Summit, which South Korea will host on October 31st and November 1st. This marks the second in-person meeting between Trump and Lee after their first summit at the White House in August. The two leaders are expected to discuss a broad range of bilateral and regional issues, including trade, security, and diplomacy with North Korea. Their meeting also comes amid intensive trade negotiations between Seoul and Washington, as both sides work to bridge differences over the implementation of South Korea's $350 billion investment pledge under a bilateral framework trade deal signed in July. The White House also confirmed that Trump will hold talks with Chinese President Xi Jinping while in South Korea.
On Thursday morning local time, President Trump will participate in a bilateral meeting with President Xi of the People's Republic of China before departing to return home to Washington, D.C.
Trump's meeting with Xi is drawing global attention as both leaders are expected to explore a potential trade agreement following the recent escalation of tensions between Washington and Beijing. The talks come after China tightened export controls on rare earth materials, and President Trump threatened to impose an additional 100% tariff on Chinese goods. Observers say the summit could be a pivotal moment for U.S.-China economic relations, while also testing diplomatic coordination in the broader Asia-Pacific region as world leaders converge in South Korea for the high-stakes APEC summit. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Now, just several hours ago, South Korean officials returned from Washington, D.C. following tariff negotiations with the U.S. Kim Bo-kyung tells us the outcome of these talks.
The Presidential Chief of Staff for Policy, Kim Yong-bum, and Industry Minister Kim Jong-kwon have returned home from Washington after holding follow-up tariff negotiations with U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick. Though there had been some progress in the talks, the two countries still remain sharply divided over key points, the presidential aide said on Friday to the reporters at Incheon Airport.
There are still a few remaining issues, and we're now at a very critical moment. We'll do our best until the very end.
When asked about the possibility of reaching a trade deal by the time President Lee meets President Trump next week, Kim said there is still a long way to go and that time is running out.
There's no time left for additional face-to-face negotiations, and APEC is just around the corner. Time is running out, and if we're hoping for a deal to be reached around APEC, there's still a long way to go.
Kim, however, added that negotiations sometimes advance rapidly at the final stage. The officials did not disclose specific areas where they were at odds with the U.S., but one of the key issues has been differences over how to implement Seoul's $350 billion investment pledge. There were some expectations of two allies reaching a trade deal as Washington took one step back from demanding a full cash investment or upfront equity contribution, which Seoul deemed unrealistic given the country's foreign exchange constraints. However, the U.S. is still reportedly pressing for a considerable portion of direct cash investment to which South Korea is seeking to reduce the cash portion as much as possible and extend the investment period to avoid shocks to Korea's foreign exchange market. There still are some views, though, that the upcoming Korea-U.S. summit next week could provide the momentum to reach a deal. 김보경, Arirang News.
Now, as we just heard, the APEC is just 1 week out and anticipation is growing more than ever with the ever-changing global landscape. For a deeper look, we have Professor Daniel Connolly of Hankuk University of Foreign Studies with us virtually. Good morning, Professor.
Good morning. Thank you for inviting me.
Now, I want to start at a sort of general APEC question. Do you think the member states will be able to agree on a joint statement? And if they do, what kind of message are we expecting?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question because the problem is APEC is an institution dedicated to globalization and free trade in an increasingly anti-globalized world, especially President Trump. But I think one of the advantages for APEC is that unlike other institutions like NATO or the UN, Trump is often rather indifferent to the organization rather than actively hostile. So I think this indifference creates some space for negotiators to agree on a joint statement, but I don't expect anything revolutionary. APEC joint statements tend to be very technocratic and technical. Maybe the biggest issue might be the traditional strong wording on free trade and the WTO. I expect perhaps that wording might be toned down in this summit's joint statement. Maybe there will be talk about multilateral trade rather than free trade. But I think the other themes of this year's APEC, AI and sustainability, are relatively uncontroversial for most member states.
Right, but the world is sort of tuning in to specific issues as well. And for South Koreans, it's about the trade negotiations, as we just heard from two reports before this. Are we expecting that deal to be closed by the time President Trump comes here for a summit with President Lee Jae-myung?
Well, I think diplomats are a lot like my students. Sometimes they do their best work at the very last minute, and having kind of a summit meeting like this will definitely incentivize the diplomats to negotiate and finalize a deal. And I think the US side especially wants that photo op of President Lee signing the investment deal with Trump. But I'm not sure if the South Korean side is ready for that yet. Maybe the pressure on South Korea to make a deal could be kind of dangerous. So I think no deal at the summit is better than the wrong deal, for South Korea especially.
That's right. And also, there's been talk in the town about possible another meeting between Trump and Kim Jong-un. And, APEC could be a stage for that. And they've been sort of leaking that kind of idea into the public. So do you think that's possible? And what will be talked about if it is to be held?
I think Trump is definitely open to a meeting. We all know Trump loves the photo ops. He loves this kind of narrative of being a peacemaker. So it really depends on whether or not Kim Jong-un is willing to make a deal and show up to talk to him. And I think from the North Korean perspective, there might be a couple of reasons why this might be done. First, it can take the headlines away from South Korea and the APEC summit. Historically, North Korea has always tried to steal the limelight from South Korea whenever it hosts international events. So Kim Jong-un meeting Trump would definitely take the headlines away from APEC in this kind of realistic policy approach. But more fundamentally, I think North Korea's goal is to have more and more one-on-one interactions with the United States. And this could be a chance for Kim Jong-un to continue these one-on-one meetings. But if it does happen, I expect the North Koreans will do it at the very last minute due to security concerns. So it seems unlikely right now, but remember the last personal summit they had at the DMZ, it was a very short notice as well.
Right, and talking about headlines and taking the spotlight, now the world is probably, apart from Koreans, looking at this meeting that was confirmed just overnight here in South Korea, the Donald Trump and Xi Jinping meeting. How significant is it at this moment for the bilateral relations for the two? And what issues would be on the top of the agenda?
Right. Well, absolutely. I think this impending trade war between the United States and China is on the headlines. As we just saw, there's Trump's promising to increase the tariffs by another 100% in November 1st. China's flexing its muscle in terms of export controls on rare earth minerals. I think absolutely the meeting is going to be about the trade war directly or indirectly. And I think both sides are looking for an off-ramp to de-escalate. And a meeting at the summit might give both leaders an opportunity to paper over this trade war. But I only expect a truce, if anything, because the US hasn't really abandoned its goal of undermining China economically and technologically, and China hasn't shown any sign of submitting to the United States. So I would say China and the US right now are like two trains on a collision course. A meeting between the leaders can slow the trains down or even pause them, but it's going to take a lot more diplomatic engagement to actually put them on different tracks or to align them. So maybe a truce, but I think I'm not expecting any breakthrough coming up.
Well, that's all the questions we have, and we're all excited for the event next week, right? Well, thank you for joining us this morning, and hope to see you soon.
Thank you.
And as we just heard, the APEC summit comes next week amid a fast-changing global landscape with the strongest global powers coming face-to-face in Gyeongju. And in light of this, the United States former Secretary General told Arirang News the stakes are ever higher for multilateral action, with a role for South Korea as the host nation being more crucial than ever. Here's our Oh Soo-young with more.
Putting politics aside, the United States, China and Russia must seek solutions together for the future of humanity when world leaders gather at the meeting of the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation in Korea next week. That's according to Ban Ki-moon, former United Nations Secretary General, in an interview with Arirang TV.
This should not be just one of the many summit meetings. This should be regarded by the leaders as the most serious APEC meeting. APEC is Asia Pacific, but we should not confine it to the limit of Asia Pacific. We have to look beyond the boundaries of Asia Pacific. Otherwise, we will never be able to declare that we are living in a sustainable world. Now that the United States President and Chinese President and Russia is also member state, I sincerely hope that they sit down together with a humble mind for the future of our planet Earth and also humanity as a whole.
Amid geopolitical confrontations and trade tensions, Pan warned that the world is more divided than before, hampering the progress on tackling climate change and achieving sustainable development, both key themes of this year's APEC. Pan called on the US to return to the Paris Climate Agreement, which was reached under his leadership, bringing together 196 countries in collective carbon reduction and pledges to help developing countries attain the means for green growth.
The United States is the most powerful, most resourceful country, leader country of the world. No doubt about that. US cannot do it alone. We must join all our hands on the deck together, be they political or business leaders, civil society, men and women, young people. We have moral duty to transfer this only planet Earth to our succeeding generations, to the generation next decade, next centuries.
Reflecting on his own experience as South Korea's foreign minister when the country first hosted APEC in 2005, he said that the same cooperative spirit must return to Gyeongju 2 decades later to revive multilateralism. In doing so, Pan urged current leaders to think beyond election cycles and short-term political gains for the sake of the planet they pass down to successive generations.
I'm urging particularly political leaders who are much more interested in having their political power in their hands, but those people who are in power, they bear historical as well as political responsibility. I'm sure that history will judge their leadership later.
Pan Ki-moon, who served as the 8th United Nations Secretary General, now heads the Pan Ki-moon Foundation for a Better Future and chairs the Global Green Growth Institute, continuing his work to advance sustainable development and climate action across the world. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
Former President Yoon Suk-yeol and his wife Kim Gun-hee will each face trial on Friday at the Seoul Central District Court, though Yoon is unlikely to appear in person. Yoon is on trial for insurrection and abuse of power, with proceedings set to take place without him for the 16th time. Meanwhile, his wife is on a trial for Capital Markets Act violations, with former lawmaker Kim Young-sun set to testify. Prosecutors allege that the former First Lady received a free public opinion survey from political broker Myung Tae-gyun ahead of the 2022 presidential election, and in return intervened to help Kim Young-sun secure a party nomination in the June 2022 parliamentary by-election. The Gimhae National Museum is holding a special exhibition to mark the 2nd anniversary of Gaya Tumuli designation as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Our Cha Yoon-kyung reports.
A shield painted in red and black, striking with its vividness and sophistication, is a recreation based on a fragment of a leather shield found in Daeseongdong Tomb No. 11 in Gimhae and resembles the original. The shield fragment, found as a relic in the tomb of a member of the Geumgwan Gaya ruling class, symbolizes protection from bad luck entering the tomb. A quiver, also restored from remains in Daeseongdong Tomb No. 14, is distinctive for its design and was carried like a backpack.
These kinds of leather shields were only included in the tombs of the ruling class. This is the first time that we have completely restored the shape of the artifacts.
Artifacts that are being unveiled to the public for the first time could attract even more attention from visitors. Cylindrical bronzeware, used during rituals and ceremonies in the 4th to early 5th century, have lengths of up to 180 centimeters. There are around 70 items on display in total, and visitors can examine them in 3D through digital screens.
There may have been additional meanings, such as using them in rituals to ward off evil spirits. And as researchers have begun to introduce these interpretations, it has opened up further opportunities to study the functions of the artifacts.
Gimhae National Museum, which has served as a space dedicated to sharing the cultural heritage of the Gaya Kingdom, is holding a special exhibition, Coexistence of Time, Ancient Tombs in Daeseongdong, Gimhae, in the Gayanuri Exhibition Gallery from September 23rd until February 2nd next year. Cha Yoon-kyung, Arirang News.
Good morning, I'm Chu Ji-hyun, and this is The World Now. In Brussels on Thursday, European leaders failed to reach an agreement on using frozen Russian assets to help fund Ukraine's war effort, despite a direct appeal from President Vladimir Zelensky for urgent action. Zelensky called on the European Union to release 140 billion euros held in a Belgian clearinghouse, saying, quote, "Russia brought war to our land, and they have to pay for this war." But opposition from Belgium, which hosts most of the frozen funds, blocked consensus. Belgian Prime Minister Bart de Wever warned that his country needs guarantees that other members will share any legal or financial risks if Moscow challenges the move. EU leaders instead asked the European Commission to explore alternative financing options, postponing a final decision until December's summit. The impasse came as the EU approved its 19th round of sanctions, targeting Russian liquefied natural gas and several Chinese energy buyers, while the U.S. imposed new measures on Russia's two largest oil companies. U.S. President Donald Trump granted a presidential pardon on Thursday to Changpeng Zhao, the founder of the world's largest cryptocurrency exchange, Binance. Zhao had already served a 4-month sentence after pleading guilty in 2024 to money laundering violations, but this pardon is likely to remove restrictions on him running financial firms. The White House called Zhao's prosecution part of the prior administration's, quote, war on cryptocurrency, saying Trump acted to correct Biden-era overreach. But critics, including Senator Elizabeth Warren, labeled the move as a kind of corruption, citing Trump's personal crypto investments and family business links to Binance-backed ventures. The decision follows Trump's broader push to ease crypto rules. In New York on Thursday, the NBA was rocked by a sweeping federal gambling investigations that led to the arrest of Portland's Trailblazers coach Chauncey Billups, Miami Heat player Terry Rozier, and more than 30 others accused of rigging games and poker matches tied to mafia families. Prosecutors say Billups joined a poker conspiracy that used X-ray tables, hidden cameras, and special sunglasses to cheat gamblers out of at least $7 million. Rozier is charged with sharing private player information and leaving games early to help rig bets. FBI Director Kash Patel said the operation revealed tens of millions of dollars in fraud, theft, and robbery. Both men face money laundering and wire fraud conspiracy charges and have been placed on leave as the NBA pledges full cooperation. The league said, quote, the integrity of our game remains our top priority. In Nigeria, discarded plastic bottles, wrappers, and metal tops took on a new life this week. A bold trashion show in Lagos turned that waste into fashion and art. The event, staged by the Green Fingers Wildlife Initiative, featured students and teenage designers who built colorful outfits entirely from recycled beach litter. Founder Chinedu Mogbo said this year's theme, Sea Turtle Awakening, highlights how plastic pollution threatens marine life across West Africa. Nigeria produces about 2.5 million tons of plastic waste each year, much of it ending up in rivers and the Atlantic Ocean. Models said the fashion show proves that, quote, beauty can also be sustainable. Organizers hope the spectacle will inspire young people to fight plastic pollution, one recycled design at a time.
Hope the fog didn't cause you a headache this morning. The fog has lifted, but the skies will remain partly cloudy for most of the day. Meanwhile, the East Coast will be rainy, with a heavy rain advisory being issued along the east coast of Gangwon-do province, where showers were lashing down 10 to 20 millimeters per hour. And it's going to be wet through tomorrow morning. Temperature-wise, we will enjoy this near-average autumn weather through the weekend, but get ready for a dramatic shift next week. On Tuesday, Seoul starts the day at just 2 degrees Celsius, and some of the central areas will see temperatures dip below freezing. But this afternoon, Seoul and Daegu will reach a pleasant 20 degrees Celsius. Gwangju, Busan, Jeju will be topping out at 22 degrees. After that big cold hits us early next week, temperatures will stay colder than normal through the end of the month. Many are coming down with a cold, so please take care.
That's all we have for this morning. Arirang News will be back at noon Korea time. Thanks for watching.